Welcome back to Pop Goes the 60s. I'm Matt Williamson, and this is a continuation of my Beatle album reviews, and today we're going to be talking about Beatles for Sale. So I wanted to get back on track here with my reviews, but before I was going to continue talking about the US releases, I really needed to give some attention to the UK releases of 1964, which are completely different than what was going on in the United States. So I did that with the prior video with the UK version of A Hard Day's Night, and today we're going to look at Beatles for Sale, which was released December 4th, 1964 in the UK. And it knocked A Hard Day's Night off the top of the charts. And this album was in the top position for, depending on what chart you're looking at, anywhere between 7 and 11 weeks. So it was a very big hit. The one thing about this album I'm going to start with is that this album has always been a big problem for Beatles fans in the sense that they always rank it near the bottom of the Beatles albums as far as quality goes. Now, why is that? Well, the main reason I see is that it's a simultaneous step forward and a step backwards. Now, the step forward, let's talk about that first. This album saw a lyrical step forward, particularly from John Lennon, his famous trilogy, Babies in Black, No Reply, and I'm a Loser. This kind of Dylan style was much more nuanced, and this was considered a step forward in Beatle lyric writing. Instrumentally, I would say that Ringo uses a wider variety of percussion instruments, timpani, African hand drum, and even a chocalo. Now, George Harrison had been experimenting on the prior album with an electric 12-string, which is evident on this album, but he also added his Tennessean Gretsch as well. So that gave it a little bit, I don't know, maybe a slightly more country western feel. At least that's the way he played it anyway. So those are the advancements, I guess, in this album. But the step backwards has to do with the covers. Now, this album has 14 tracks on it, and 6 of those 14 tracks are cover songs. And after coming off an all-original A Hard Day's Night, I can't see how this isn't looked at as anything but a regressive move by going to these so many cover songs. And the cover songs, in my opinion, aren't even that good. And let me talk about the covers a bit, because I think the covers expose the Beatles as being, for one of the only times in their run, in their 10-year run, where they are slightly out of step with what's really going on. And this has to do with the rockers versus the mods thing. So if you remember in the movie A Hard Day's Night, are you a mod or are you a rocker? And Ringo's like, no, I'm a mocker. Well, that's all very funny, but really what was going on here, if you just base what the Beatles were doing on these covers, they were rockers. Rockers listened to that mid-50s rock and roll and rockabilly stuff. So you see that here in the covers with Carl Perkins and Buddy Holly, Little Richard. And that was not where the mod direction was going. The mod direction by the mid-60s, 1964, was more blues and R&B. Like, you know, they weren't covering 50s stuff, they were covering stuff like Marvin Gaye. So in that respect, the Beatles were slightly out of step and maybe behind the times slightly with their covers.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music. Is love real? But well, honey, don't. Everybody is trying to be my baby now. Words of love you whisper soft and true. Hey, 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 baby, Mr. Moonlight.
Now, among these covers, we don't really have a Twist and Shout or Long Tall Sally here. So that's why I suggested that these were some of their weakest covers to date. And they had 6 shots at it, too. They had 6 covers to do. So that's what they gave us. And again, I view this as a bit regressive coming off of the Hard Day's Night, all Lennon McCartney extravaganza that, to me, really signified what the Beatles were all about, and that's original music. So even a mediocre original, to me, is always better than a cover song. So at this point, I think the Beatles were doing these cover songs. They still had some in their live shows, so I think they were playing for themselves a little bit. So maybe that was the real thing, but I think fans caught on right away where the value was, and that is in the originals. Now, the most probably notorious cover on here is Mr. Moonlight. And Music critic Tom Erlewine says, it doesn't help that Lennon's cover of his beloved obscurity, Mr. Moonlight, winds up as arguably the worst thing the group ever recorded. So that's some pretty strong words. And this song oftentimes is near the very bottom or at the very top of what people rate as worst Beatles songs ever recorded. I always viewed Mr. Moonlight also as one of their worst songs they ever did. And to me, it felt like a parody song from some cheesy Elvis movie. And the organ solo tells you all you need to know about this song. And I just don't see how the Beatles recorded this with a straight face. So I think whether you love or you hate that song, I think the joke is on us. Now, some of these other songs, for example, Rock and Roll Music by Chuck Berry, I think the time had passed to do this song in the studio. Fine if you're doing it live, but I just think it's just very passé and a song that they really had no business doing. It's not on the level of a Long Tall Sally or Twist and Shout, and I think they regarded it as such, but it just doesn't come across that way on the album. Words of Love is a nice Buddy Holly song, but not a lot of balls to it. Honey Don't, I mean, I could do without that song completely. A lousy Ringo delivery. Same thing with Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. Could you put more echo on that, please? And Kansas City, Hey, 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 marginal at best. With regard to this mod versus rockers thing here on Beatles for Sale, I think the Beatles, they still love doing the 50s rockers. So this is minor criticism for them. But I think that the part of the whole mod scene too by 1964 and certainly in the year that followed became not just a musical movement, but also fashion and art. So the Beatles were certainly part of that. And I think, this was all part of the scene they were creating and not even realizing it. But they were still entrenched in some of the mid-50s rock and roll. Now, the original songs tell a completely different story.
I'm a loser, and I'm not what I appear to be. I know that you saw me as I looked up to see your face. Oh dear, what can I do? Baby's in black and I'm feeling blue. For tomorrow may rain, so I'll follow the sun. I ain't got nothing but love, babe. 8 days a week. Every little thing she does for me. Why should it be so much to ask of you what you're doing to me? I think I'll take a walk and look for her.
Those first three songs that I refer to as the Lennon trilogy basically tells you all you need to know about the Beatles' worldview in 1964, late 1964 anyway, which was heavily influenced by Dylan. Now Lennon was always kind of at odds with Dylan over the years, and they kind of had this rivalry, mostly a friendly rivalry, but I think Lennon was a little bit self-conscious about it. And I don't know why he was at all, because this kind of writing of Lennon's, though it appeared in his songs now, he was kind of writing surreally for quite some time. The book, in his own right, incorporated a lot of different kinds of Dylan-esque type of writing well before Dylan was on the scene even. So Lennon, that was always part of his writing style anyway. It just didn't come out on record until now. Now the song I Don't Want to Spoil Party is another great Lennon track and a favorite of mine from this album. And writer Ian MacDonald likened the effect of Lennon's confessional tone, which is couched in a, quote, protective shell of pastiche, which I think is a really nice way of putting Lennon's lyrics in here. He always gives it a little bit of, MacDonald used the word pastiche, but I think a little playfulness to it that made it bittersweet. Now, Tom Erlewine went on to say that in Lennon's case, his songs in here were bitter and in some cases self-loathing. So I thought that was a rather strong statement. But we see Lennon really getting introspective here. I'm a loser, no reply, unrequited love, things like that. So this is no longer the boy meets girl phase. Some people notice this direction that the Beatles took on this album as having been influenced by their trip to America and being exposed to country music. So John Lennon had said of the album, quote, "You could call our new one a Beatles Country and Western LP." And Peter Doggett says that their social milieu in 1964 represented, quote, new territory for pop and a challenge to the British class delineation as the Beatles introduced an arty middle class sensibility to pop music. Let's have a look at this cover a little more closely. In this copy and paste world we live in, we continually are told that this is the album. The Beatles are tired. Look at their faces. They didn't have enough original material. They have 6 covers, blah, blah, blah. Lennon is, being self-loathing, whatever. But I don't view this album cover as being tired at all. What I see here is a photographer at the top of his game, Bob Freeman, capturing artists that want to be taken as serious artists. So that's what this tells me. This great photograph taken at London's Hyde Park, I think early in the morning. And the back photo is from the same session. Not as good. Used on one of the cheesy United States album covers. I'll get to that in a future video. But Beatles For Sale, small type here. Too bad they have all this EMI crap on it. But this is one of the early gatefolds. I think this is actually poorly done. Would have been nice to have colors, better photos on the inside here. I think that's somewhat of a missed opportunity, but a gatefold nonetheless. So the Beatles were, obviously they were putting some money into their product. And I just think that this is more of a mod look. This direction is mod. You wouldn't think that by maybe listening to some of the covers that would reflect this cover, this photograph rather, but that's what we have here. One of the other fallacies in line with this whole tired business is that the tone of this was more quiet and more introspective and more Dylan-esque. Well, really, I think that side 2 of A Hard Day's Night was already pointing to that direction anyway. Songs like I'll Cry Instead, Things We Said Today, I'll Be Back. I mean, those are already getting into that territory. And so I don't think that this is as cut and dry of a direction as most people have told us in the past. Now, if you look at the single that was released during these album sessions, both sides of that single represent something very different than what you were hearing on here.
She's a woman who understands. She's a woman who loves her man.
So while the Beatles were rocking out on their single, there's been talk about, well, they didn't have the material, that's why they did these covers. Well, there was other material. I like to bust that myth as well. One song that was around was George Harrison's You'll Know What to Do.
So if you want me, just like I need you, you know what to do.
Now, that's his second song he worked on. Not the strongest song he ever wrote, but they could have worked that out a little bit more and made it into something. They're the Beatles after all, aren't they? The biggest missed opportunity on a song that they had in their back pocket that they did not record was the song called It's For You, and this was something given to Cilla Black. Now this was primarily a McCartney song, but Lennon had quite a bit of input in this, and we know this because when it was given to Cilla Black, Lennon and McCartney were there alongside George Martin producing. And there was somewhat of an argument between John and Paul and George Martin. I don't know what the disagreement was exactly, but whatever the case, John Lennon had a big part of the production of that, or had some say-so, and he also did an introduction to the song when Cilla Black released it.
Hello, this is John Lennon of the Beatles. We'd like to play you a song now that Paul and I have just written specially for Cilla Black. A beautiful girl, a beautiful singer. Hope you like it. Here it is. It's called It's For You.
The song It's For You maybe was deemed not Beatle-y enough, but this to me is the precursor of Yesterday. So this is as progressive as the Beatles were getting. And even though it maybe sounds a little more show-tuney, it's a great song. And it's too bad the Beatles didn't finish recording it.
I'd say someday I'm bound to give my heart away. I do. It's for you, love.
Now that version you heard was actually the demo of Paul. He's just got this little snippet of a demo and part of the Cilla Black track. So that was married together to make what could have been a Beatles song. Now we see this big rush of Lennon tracks in 1964 and over the course of A Hard Day's Night and Beatles For Sale. And, there's been all this talk about Paul's melees. Why is Paul not writing? Well, writer Ian MacDonald suggested that McCartney was too preoccupied with Jane Asher. And that was one comment. And I don't know that I agree with that at all. In fact, I don't agree with that, because if you actually add up what they were actually working on, there were more than enough McCartney songs around. And I don't know why they weren't putting more on Beatle albums. Here's an example of some of the songs that were given away by Paul McCartney. A World Without Love, Peter and Gordon, that song went to #1 in the States and in the UK. Nobody I Know, Peter and Gordon, #10 in the UK, top 20 in the US. I Don't Want to See You Again, #9 in the US on the adult contemporary chart. I'll Keep You Satisfied, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, #4 in the UK. I'll Be On My Way, that was actually recorded by the Beatles on the BBC, also given to Billy J. Kramer. And finally, From a Window, which was a hit in the States for Chad and Jeremy. The song I'll Follow the Sun on this album was a Paul song that had been around for a while, and he resurrected it for this album. No reason why he couldn't have done that with some of these other tracks. He had some older songs too in his back pocket, like One and One is Two, Like Dreamers Do, Love of the Love, and Tip of My Tongue. Now those songs aren't great songs, but at least they were around. So this idea that Paul McCartney had some kind of writer's block or wasn't writing songs is just not true. I mean, there's enough songs here almost for a McCartney solo album. And I don't know, were these songs not rocky enough? Did they not rock hard enough? I mean, you had songs on A Hard Day's Night like Things We Said Today and I Love Her. So, I mean, he was doing ballads there too, and they were great songs. So I think that McCartney's contributions generally just showed the variety that the Beatles offered their fans. What are we to pull from this information that Paul McCartney, it seems like he had some indentured servitude here that he had to do before he got his tracks on a Beatle album. And this kind of sounds familiar, but it's only talked about in the vein of George Harrison, who also had to go through the same thing, but later, and he was never as prolific as McCartney and didn't work as hard, I don't think, as McCartney. Maybe he just didn't have it in him. But here we see McCartney having tons of songs, but having to give them to other artists to perform. And I think some of these songs would have made great Beatle tracks. So for me, I've always looked at this album as a potential all-original album, and here's the track listing I would have done. And of course, this is all very easy to do in hindsight, but here's my track listing. I would have had I'm a Loser, I'll Follow the Sun, 8 Days a Week, Every Little Thing, What You're Doing, Babies in Black, A World Without Love, and then the second side, I Feel Fine, From a Window, No Reply, It's For You, You'll Know What to Do, She's a Woman, and I Don't Want to Spoil a Party. So that's what could have been, and I think that would have rendered a much better album than what they gave us with all these cheesy covers. They're not all cheesy. I shouldn't be so hard on the covers. I just have never been a fan of their covers. Once they hit Hard Day's Night, I'm like, give me all originals. That's all I care about. There's never a cover that they do that probably wouldn't be better served by replacing with an original. And as we know, as the Beatles went on, they always had a couple extra songs that they didn't use, they never finished off. Wouldn't it have been nice to have those finished off, like these ones that I mentioned here? From a Window is a song I've always liked, and I think what the Beatles could have done with those as a group would have been really wonderful. So that's my review on the Beatles For Sale. Still a great album, start to finish. I do listen to it all the way through occasionally, and again, like a lot of the Beatles stuff pre-Rubber Soul, this music is period music for me. So that's why I will listen to the US version of A Hard Day's Night with the George Martin orchestrations. There's a period I like to immerse myself in, and you can totally do that with this album. So another great work by the Beatles, but not without its problems. Again, we must remember the Beatles are not beyond criticism, and there's plenty of criticism to go around on this album, like it or not. So I'll be back with another Beatle review here very soon, so thank you for joining me here on Pop Goes the 60s.